The entire restaurant went silent when Daniel stood up from his chair. He looked at the woman sitting across from him and whispered, "You lied to me." Sarah's hands began to shake. "I never lied to you, Daniel." He pushed a small envelope across the table. "Then explain this." Sarah looked down at the envelope. The moment she saw the photograph inside, the color disappeared from her face. Because the photograph contained a secret she had spent 15 years trying to forget. And Daniel had just discovered it. But to understand why a millionaire had invited his secretary to dinner, we have to go back 6 months. Daniel Carter was 38 years old and one of the richest businessmen in Lagos. He owned hotels, apartments, and several successful companies. Everywhere he went, people admired him. Women wanted his attention. Men wanted his friendship. Employees wanted his approval. But there was one person in his company whom almost everyone ignored. Her name was Sarah Williams. Sarah was Daniel's personal secretary. She was quiet. She wore simple clothes. She rarely wore makeup. Her glasses were old, and her hair was usually tied back. Some employees secretly called her the ugly secretary. Sarah knew what they said. But she never complained. Every morning, she arrived before everyone else. Every evening, she was usually the last person to leave. One afternoon, Daniel walked into his office and found Sarah working. "Sarah." "Yes, sir." "Did you finish the documents?" "Yes. They're on your desk." Daniel looked at her. "You're still here. I have a few things to finish." He nodded and walked away. He didn't know that Sarah had been working for him for 7 years. He didn't know that she had rejected 3 job offers because she believed in his company. And he certainly didn't know why she always refused invitations to company parties. Until one Friday evening, Daniel's friends convinced him to attend an expensive dinner at a luxury restaurant. One of his friends laughed and said, "You're 38 and still unmarried. You need a woman." Daniel smiled. "I'm too busy." His friend pointed toward the entrance. "Then choose someone tonight." Daniel looked around. Beautiful women were everywhere. But suddenly, he remembered Sarah. An idea came into his mind. It wasn't a kind idea. It was cruel. He smiled. "I know exactly who I'm taking." The next morning, Daniel called Sarah into his office. "Sarah, I want you to have dinner with me tonight." She froze. "Dinner?" "Yes. Is it a business meeting?" Daniel smiled. "Something like that." Sarah hesitated. "Sir, I don't think. It's an order." She quietly nodded. "Okay." That evening, Sarah arrived at the restaurant. She wore a simple blue dress. She had borrowed it from her neighbor. When Daniel saw her, he almost laughed. His friends were already waiting. One of them whispered, "That's your secretary." Daniel nodded. They laughed. Sarah heard them, but she pretended not to. She sat beside Daniel. The dinner began. For the first 20 minutes, everyone talked and laughed. Then Daniel decided to embarrass her. "Sarah," he said loudly, "tell everyone how you got this job." She looked at him. "I applied like everyone else." Daniel smiled. "No special connection." "No." Another friend laughed. "Daniel, you could do much better." Sarah lowered her eyes. Daniel expected her to cry. Instead, she smiled. "Maybe he could." Everyone became quiet. Daniel looked at her. "What did you say?" Sarah calmly picked up her glass. "I said maybe he could." For the first time that evening, Daniel felt uncomfortable. Because there was something different about her. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't angry. She looked tired. As if she had experienced much worse things than this. Then a waiter accidentally dropped a glass near Sarah. The glass shattered. Sarah immediately stood up. "I'm sorry." Daniel stared at her. "You're apologizing." Sarah looked at the broken glass. "I know what it feels like to be blamed for something you didn't do." Daniel didn't understand. But before he could ask, Sarah walked toward the restroom. And that's when Daniel noticed something. A small scar on her wrist. The next morning, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. He searched through her employee records. Nothing seemed unusual. Father, deceased. Mother, deceased. Education, excellent. Work history, perfect. But there was one strange thing. Her emergency contact was blank. Daniel called the HR manager. "Why doesn't Sarah have an emergency contact?" The manager looked uncomfortable. "She asked us not to ask questions." Daniel frowned. "Why?" "I don't know." That afternoon, Daniel accidentally saw Sarah receiving a phone call. Her face changed immediately. She stepped outside. Yes. There was a long silence. Then Sarah whispered, "Please don't call me again." She ended the call. Daniel watched from a distance. That night, he followed her. Sarah took a bus to a small neighborhood far away from the city center. Daniel was shocked. His secretary lived in a tiny rented room. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. Sarah walked into a small house next door. A little boy ran toward her. "Mama." Daniel froze. Sarah hugged him tightly. "I missed you." The boy smiled. Daniel stared through the window. He had never known Sarah had a child. The next morning, he confronted her. "You have a son." Sarah became silent. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't your business." Daniel was stunned. For the first time, Sarah looked directly into his eyes. "You've worked with me for 7 years, Daniel." She paused. "You know how I type your emails. You know how I organize your meetings. You know how I save your company millions of dollars every year. But you never once asked how I was doing." Daniel had no answer. Then Sarah walked away. Daniel secretly learned that Sarah's son was named Michael. Michael was 12 years old. He had a heart condition. Sarah had been paying for his treatment alone. She worked during the day. At night, she cleaned offices. On weekends, she sold homemade food. Daniel couldn't believe it. The woman everyone called ugly had spent years sacrificing everything for her son. But there was something even more shocking. Daniel discovered that Sarah had once been engaged. Her fiancé had abandoned her after learning she was pregnant. He told her, "I'm not going to destroy my future because of you." Sarah raised Michael alone. Daniel felt ashamed. He remembered the restaurant, the laughter, the humiliation, the way he had treated her. For the first time, Daniel realized that the woman he had considered ordinary was actually extraordinary. But then something happened. Michael's condition suddenly became worse. Sarah rushed him to the hospital. The doctors said he needed an expensive operation. Sarah had only half the money. She sold her jewelry. She borrowed money. She even considered selling the little house she lived in. But she was still short. One night, Sarah sat beside her sleeping son and cried, "I don't know what else to give you." A voice came from the doorway. "I do." Sarah turned around. Daniel was standing there. Sarah immediately became angry. "You followed me." Daniel shook his head. "No." He placed an envelope on the table. "I came because I finally learned who you are." Sarah didn't touch it. "I don't need your pity." "It isn't pity." "Then what is it?" Daniel looked at her. "An apology." Sarah stared at him. Daniel continued, "I invited you to dinner because I wanted to embarrass you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. No." Daniel lowered his head. "I was cruel." "Yes, you were. I thought you were." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Ugly?" Sarah asked. Daniel nodded. Sarah smiled sadly. "You weren't the first person to think that." Then Daniel said something she never expected. "You're not ugly, Sarah." She looked at him. "You just spent your whole life around people who only knew how to look at faces." Sarah began crying. Daniel handed her the envelope. Inside was enough money to pay for Michael's surgery. Sarah immediately shook her head. "No, please. I can't accept this." "Then don't accept it as charity." Sarah looked confused. Daniel continued, "I'm offering you a partnership." "A partnership?" "Yes." Daniel had discovered that many of the company's most successful ideas had actually come from Sarah. She had been solving problems quietly for years. So Daniel offered her a position as a business partner. Not because she was beautiful. Not because he felt sorry for her. But because she was brilliant. Sarah finally accepted. Michael's surgery was successful. Months passed. Sarah's life changed. But she never forgot who she had been. One evening, Daniel invited Sarah to dinner again. This time, there was no audience. No friends. No humiliation. Just the two of them. Daniel placed an old photograph on the table. Sarah picked it up. Her hands began shaking. "Where did you get this?" "I found it in an old company file." Sarah stared at the photograph. It showed a young woman standing beside a man. Daniel pointed at the man. "My father." Sarah's eyes widened. "You knew him?" She nodded slowly. "Your father was the reason I got this job." Daniel was shocked. "What?" Sarah explained. 15 years earlier, before Daniel had become successful, his father had helped a struggling young woman. That woman was Sarah. He had paid for her education. He had told her, Someday, help someone else the way I'm helping you. Sarah had never forgotten those words. When Daniel's company began hiring, she applied. She didn't tell Daniel about her connection to his father because she didn't want special treatment. Daniel looked at the photograph again. Then he understood. Sarah had never worked for him because she needed his money. She had worked for him because she believed in his father's dream. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. You could have told me. Sarah smiled. Would you have believed me? Daniel laughed sadly. Probably not. 1 year later, Daniel's company had grown larger than ever. Sarah was now one of the company's most respected executives. But she remained the same person. Simple, kind, humble. One morning, Daniel walked into the office and found Sarah helping a new employee. He smiled. Still helping everyone. Sarah looked up. Someone once taught me that kindness should be passed forward. Daniel smiled. Then he said, Sarah, can I ask you something? What? Would you have dinner with me tonight? Sarah laughed. Is this another trick? No. Then why? Daniel looked into her eyes. Because this time, I want to take you to dinner for the right reason. Sarah smiled. Maybe. Daniel laughed. And for the first time, Sarah realized something. The man who once judged her by her appearance had finally learned to see her heart. And perhaps that was the greatest transformation of all. Never judge someone by the clothes they wear, the face they have, or the life they appear to live. Sometimes the person everyone ignores is carrying the biggest dreams. Sometimes the quietest person in the room has survived the loudest storms. And sometimes, the person you think is worth the least may turn out to be the person who changes your entire life. If this story touched your heart, remember one thing. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything.